Question. Because there is no permanent unchanging self, am I understanding correctly that what the Buddha meant is that all these false selves we create and consider fixed and permanent are simply obstacles and illusions between our true selves and Source? Is this what Jesus was talking about in Luke 9:23 to 27, about denying self and to take up the cross daily, so that I might die on it every night, to be a new me when I awake? When Paul said he died daily, is this what he meant? That when I go to sleep at night, I'm experiencing a little death, and I am a new self every day, because I certainly can't be the self I was yesterday, because yesterday has dissolved away. Is this also why he said some will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God? Because they spent their lives thinking they were fixed and permanent self and didn't die daily. I feel this is hugely tied in with the concept of not having expectations, because they are how we project the past onto the present. Unless I allow each moment to be new, I am living in the past via expectations. Thank you so much for these videos, Kim. Well, let's start with this, what the Buddha said. And I have a couple of videos actually where I talk about this, that there are people in the Buddhist tradition who say that the Buddha taught the concept that is now known as no self or non-self. And I'm saying that what he actually taught was there's no permanent, unchanging self. And this can be understood at different levels. So the first part of the question is, did the Buddha mean that all these false selves we create and consider fixed and permanent are obstacles between our true selves and Source? And what I talk about in many of my videos is that in our subconscious minds, we have created these structures, reactionary patterns. I think in Buddhism is called skandhas. I call them subconscious selves. And what happens is that we experience the world through these selves. It's like a perception filter that we're experiencing the world through. And yes, this is an obstacle. It's not really an obstacle, as it says here, between our true selves and Source, not the way I understand it, because in my teachings, and I've talked about this in several of my breakthrough videos and a number of other videos, I have that our lower being, our outer being, our psychology is what I call our four lower bodies, which is the identity body, the mental body, the emotional body, and the physical body. So beyond the physical body, we have these three levels of the mind, emotional, mental, and identity. And this is our outer being, our outer self. This is actually where all these separate selves or subconscious selves are located. And this is what pulls us into focusing on the world and seeing ourselves, identifying ourselves as a being in the world. Well, most people identify themselves, we are a product of the world, and they always react to the world and think there's only one way to react. So the essence of the spiritual path is that you come to disidentify yourself from these outer selves. But what is it that can do this? Well, this is what I call the conscious you, where behind all of this outer personality is the core of your lower being, which is this conscious you, which is not the outer personality. It doesn't really have a individuality personality. It's just awareness, pure awareness, neutral awareness. So we can say that when you're looking at the world through a separate self, you have this evaluation. This shouldn't have happened, this should have happened. As the conscious you in its neutral state is just observing, okay, this happened, yeah, okay. We don't have this value judgment. Don't have any fear, any anger, anything like this. You're just witnessing what's happening. But so this is the core of your lower being, this conscious you. But this conscious you is not existing on its own. It's an extension of your spiritual self, your I am presence. And your spiritual self is in the spiritual realm. So it's not affected by what happens here in the world. It's observing it, it's learning from it, it's growing from it, but it's not affected by it. So, as the questioner says, these illusions, false selves, they do not stand between you and source, if by source you mean ultimately the creator or the one mind. But they do stand between the conscious you and your higher self. But they only do this when the conscious you has stepped inside a separate self and is identifying itself with it. So that's why the whole process that I describe is that you come to see these selves one by one, see them consciously, dismiss the illusion, and then you have a better connection to your higher self. And I think it's very true, as the second part of the question says, that this is precisely what Jesus was talking about. Those who seek to save their lives shall lose it. In other words, those who seek to preserve these separate selves, they will eventually lose it. But he who is willing to lose his life in order to follow Christ, in other words, lose the outer selves in order to follow Christ, you will gain eternal life because you will reunite with your higher self. And so I think that's very true. Now, I do think that there's a little bit here that I wouldn't quite say it this way, that when I go to sleep at night, I'm experiencing a little death, and I'm a new self every day. That isn't my understanding of it. I know there are teachings out there that talk about this, but the way I see it is that the conscious you simply stop being conscious, but you still have all of these separate selves in your subconscious mind. And they don't get resolved overnight, because they only get resolved when you consciously see something. So when you wake up in the morning, you just go right back into that same sense of self that you had. So I wouldn't say it that way. And I know that Paul said it is, I die daily, but I think what Paul was referring to was what I talk about. Every day a self dies. And he comes closer to oneness with Christ, because obviously Jesus 2,000 years ago, he didn't use these concepts that I'm using today with the subconscious selves, because back then people didn't have the understanding of it. It's not that Jesus couldn't give it, but people couldn't grasp it. But you'll see in the Bible that it actually says that Jesus taught the multitudes in parables, but when they were alone together, he expounded all things to his disciples. So he obviously gave a higher teaching to his disciples. And what he gave was this, that there are things in your mind that you have to let die, because they keep you from experiencing oneness with the Christ mind. And therefore you can't really follow Jesus as he goes higher and higher into oneness with the Christ mind. And that's why you have to decide at some point to let these outer selves that are temporary and that are mortal, to let them die. And this is how you walk the path. And I think Jesus explained this with different words 2,000 years ago. The Buddha explained it with different words 2,500 years ago. But it's that same process, because you have to be careful here that you don't get fixated on words, because obviously I'm using words today that are geared towards the fact that we have a certain knowledge, you have certain concepts of the human psyche today. I mean, I don't know at the Buddha's time if they had a concept of the subconscious mind, or if it was the same concept that we have today, because things change over time. But I'm just saying that behind all of the outer religions, there is this recognition of the process, that what limits us is something in our own psychology, and that we need to come to see through this Maya, this illusion, and awaken from it. And then a part of that outer self dies, and we are reborn into a higher sense of self, where we now see ourselves as more connected. I've talked in many of my videos, we have two basic states we can be in. We can see ourselves as separate beings, or we can see ourselves as connected beings. And the spiritual path really starts when you make that first shift, where you see yourself as a connected being instead of a separate being. And then you gradually increase your connection. And increasing your connection simply means letting one self die at a time, because it's the selves that block your connection. And the fewer you have, the more of a connection you have. And I can certainly witness to that has happened to me over the many years I've been on a spiritual path. I know many other people who have gone through the same process. And it really is a process that works. So I think that's, but it's true in a sense that the questioner says, I feel this is hugely tied in with the concept of not having expectations, because they are how we project the past onto the present. Unless I allow each moment to be new, I'm living in the past via expectation. And that's true, but but where are these expectations? They are not just floating around. They are in selves. So a particular self has a certain expectation. And this is what I was saying earlier, a subconscious self is based on this dualistic value judgment. Certain things should happen to me, certain things should not happen to me. And this is what creates an expectation of what should happen or what shouldn't happen. And so, as long as you have this self, the conscious you is looking at the world, relating through the world through that self. And this means that you are always seeing through this filter of this expectation of what should or shouldn't happen. I mean, I remember this when I was younger, you always, it's like every situation you were in, there was this evaluation going on in the mind. Is this going to happen? Or is something bad going to happen? Is something good going to happen? And there are some psychologists that say that there are two drives in human psychology. We're always asking the question, does this mean pain or pleasure? But it's much more than that in my view. There's much deeper, more subtle expectations than that. But it is that we have these expectations. And it's perfectly true that you are constantly projecting onto life through these expectations in these subconscious selves. And that's why you can't allow each moment to be new. You are living in the past because first of all, the expectations, the selves were created in the past, but they were also based on a certain view of what life is and what life should be. And this is also what in Buddhism has been talked about, living in the now, which has become, of course, famous in today's world through Eckhart Tolle's book, The Power of Now, and other non-dual teachings that talk about this living in the moment. And there's validity to it. It's just that it's like you can't just say to people, live in the now. Because what pulls you out of living in the now are these subconscious selves. And it doesn't help to tell people to live in the now, focus on the now. What helps people is that you show them these selves and help them resolve the selves, and then they're naturally not pulled away from the now. Because you could say, as I said, the conscious you, its essence is pure awareness, and that is you're living in the now. You are just observing what's happening. You're not evaluating, what should happen or what shouldn't happen. You're just flowing with the river of life, as you might say. And this is the natural state, right? So what we have is that here are all these people who are not in the natural state because they have all these subconscious selves. So now they go to this teacher, they found a book, and they say, oh yeah, I've got to live in the now. And now what they're actually doing is they're building another subconscious self to try and suppress the subconscious selves they already have. And that's why some people have experienced that after you go into these teachings and follow them for a while, you can't do it anymore. The strain becomes too much. And they feel like now they're right back where they started from sometimes, having to deal with their psychology. It's the same as this instant awakening. You're now, I'm awakened, so I'm living in the now. But then after a while, the subconscious selves come to the surface again, because you can't suppress them forever. You're just creating more tension in your mind when you do this. And I've seen several videos now with people who talk about being in the Neo-Advaita non-duality culture for a while, and it just became so tense for them. And that's because you are trying to suppress these subconscious selves instead of dissolving them. And then the conscious you naturally swings back to living in the now.